why we judge others, and what that reveals about us. Dear friends, good evening. Thank you for joining us. Everyone, this is your channel, Gnosis, Arizona. We have a wonderful session in store for you tonight. But before we start, let's go ahead and together refresh ourselves on this concept of impermanence. Permanence and impermanence are concepts that emphasize the temporal nature of all that exists. This means that everything changes. It means that nothing is permanent. This is telling us that all things will pass. And I'm sure that you will hear that and you will say, like a friend told me not too long ago, amen to that, brother. Yes, everything changes. Nothing is permanent. Things pass. And we may hear that and feel this internal joy, but let's do a brief experiment. And in this experiment, I'm going to ask you to simply observe what is happening within your mind, within your emotion, even within your habits. Give yourself an opportunity and imagine for a second the last time that someone judged you. Give yourself an instant and remember the last time somebody accused you. It is likely that at that moment you were shocked by the event. It is so common to have a feeling of being trapped, not being clear what to do. Suddenly you feel uncertain about what's going to happen next. Next in terms of the relationship. Next in terms of how they see you, how they perceive you, how you see yourself. And when these things are not addressed, time adds to the pressure. Before you realize the problem grows. And it continues to grow. And then what? If you're feeling that pressure in your heart, if you're feeling that discomfort, let that go. This is just an experiment. But what is key here is that what you have just experienced is the modus operandi of the ego. This is the mode of operation. This is the way that our defects work. They thrive on making dramas perpetual, making sure that dramas are never ending. So how does that work? The ego perceives and it identifies with an event. Suddenly you see yourself fascinated with the circumstances. And as the drama continues to evolve, the ego thrives and all along you suffer. Because the ego is a very bad secretary. It does not understand what is actually happening outside and it is only seeking to satisfy its desires, its commitments, its feelings. This is the way that these dramas perpetuate. And so, life is like a movie. It is a film that is composed of many frames and scenes, and it is not convenient at all to identify with any frame in that film strip of movie that is our life. It is necessary for us to not identify with a single chapter, with a single page in the book of our life, because all these things that we are experiencing are fleeting. We know that people come and go. We know that things change. We know that ideas evolve. But we must tell you this. Ignoring the dramas is the best way to perpetuate them. If you want to see problems to never go away, ignore them. Every time we do that, the same problem repeats itself. A new drama comes up. And we may be thinking, oh, this is going to pass. But if we ignore it, if we tell ourselves, oh, life is just an illusion, these things do not exist, the ego is going to continue getting stronger. And it is so common among people who are looking for create a strong foundation in their spirituality. It is so common to see them make this mistake. So let's share with you a point of view that is perhaps a little bit superior. These are lessons that are learned from the writings of the three masters in the book, The Kybalion, where they speak about the 7 Hermetic principles. There is a very peculiar concept that is called the divine paradox. And the divine paradox is telling you that there is an absolute perspective and a relative perspective of reality. And we must become very skillful in managing both. Because the absolute perspective of reality tells us very clearly that the universe is Maya. The universe is illusory, impermanent. It is non-enduring. And because there is no permanent reality, the only thing that is truth in this universe is our being. your being, my being, the Father of our Father. That is what it says from the absolute perspective. But the relative perspective says the universe is very real. And you know this because you're perceiving it through your senses. And as a matter of fact, this universe in which you are carrying yourself, where you exist, this is the only one that you know. This is the only one that we know as far as today. So this is relevant and we must care about it. So look at these two opposites. What do we do then? We do not want to fall victims to this divine paradox. We must reconcile the view. That means we know that the universe is insubstantial. We know that it is an illusion, that it is impermanent. But while we're here, we must act and live as if it were real. And if we can comprehend this, then we can live and we can exist within this universe, but without identifying with the circumstances. So this opens for us a wonderful door, because this can help us understand our ego, our psychological aggregates, these inferior things that exist within our own psyche, and we can break the cycles of the ego. I mean, the mode of operation of the ego is very predictable. You identify with something comes to your senses, you perceive it, you identify with it, and before you realize, you fascinate. And in that fascination, you fall deeper into the slumber of the consciousness. So if we know that this is the flow, then we also know that every time that we see ourselves in some adverse circumstance, in some problem, well, the ego is going to be found within the problem itself. And if the ego is found there, we can understand it as the cause of that thing that led us to identify. And of course, understanding that, we must be aware that there are some basic limitations of the mind. And key here for us to understand is that our mind has very little power eliminating those inferior aspects of us. We are so fortunate that all of these great adepts have enabled us to create a connection with those superior forces of nature so that superior forces can aid us in getting rid of these inferior aspects. I mean, maybe you have experienced this. Maybe you have on this way more experience than we can ever have. And you know that the mind is very clever. Relabeling things, justifying them, suppressing them, hiding them. That is not the way to get rid of our defects. Let's break that limitation and we can invoke of a power that is superior to the mind. In the Eastern tradition, they call it Kundalini. The Christians refer to it as the eternal feminine, or Mary as a symbol of the eternal feminine. The divine mother, that eternal feminine aspect of nature that is as much as part of your being as it is a part of mine. So, if we understand this, let's go back into the main topic. Why is it that we are judging others? Each person projects their own psychological defects into others, and we see our own flaws reflected in the people around us. These things that we see are aspects of us that have been pushed by the mind itself very deep into the subconsciousness, and we don't like them. We don't tolerate them. And when we see them, we judge them. But let me go a little bit deeper into that, because one of the reasons that we judge others is a phenomenon that is called mechanical antipathy. It is very possible that you have experienced that. You see someone, you don't even know who they are. You have never seen them, but you don't like them. Not only you don't like them, somebody may ask you, what's wrong? You say, that person annoys me. But why? I don't know. This is what we say. It could be their appearance. It could be their face. It could be the sound of their voice. It could be their demeanor, how they laugh. It could be so many different reasons. But what we are seeing in that person is an aspect of us that has been immediately reflected. It is detected at a level so below the intellect that the reason cannot even perceive it. You just react emotionally. And this is mechanical antipathy. So if you experience this, that needs to give you an indication. If I'm feeling this way, There is something there that is reflecting a part of me. We judge others because our behaviors are reflected on others. I mean, we see them, they do whatever, and we accuse them of being like this or being like that. Something that we just cannot fathom. How can you do this? This is what we think. What is happening is that as we perceive things, in our mind, we are misrepresenting the facts. We don't understand what is truly happening. We just see something that shocks us, and because of that, we judge them wrongly. And at that moment, we're creating unfair conditions. Unfairness is the root cause of all resentment. Every time that somebody has been unfair to you, if you look deep within, you may have seen that there is some kind of reaction, and those are roots of resentment. So, let's see how can we understand these defects. Let us share with you some interior and exterior aspects of some of our defects so that you can recognize them immediately. Because this is a very interesting dynamic. Look, here are some examples of interior aspects and what the ego sees reflected in someone else. Let's remember, the ego consistently mistranslates the information it gets. If it were a secretary, the ego would be a really bad secretary. So on the inside, for example, if we speak of the ego of jealousy, well, internally, this ego of jealousy is very insecure. It is fearful. Jealousy is anxious. Jealousy is unstable. I mean, jealousy can be so unstable that, maybe your guess is as good as mine, but how many crimes have not been committed in the name of jealousy? So this is what is happening inside. But when the ego perceives that on the outside, what it sees in that mirror is a distorted image. And so externally, that ego sees accusations. It sees covert distrust. It sees confrontations that are aggressive. It sees violence that can manifest itself mentally, violence that can be of emotional nature, and violence that can even manifest in a physical nature. You see, there is an inner aspect, and when that ego sees itself reflected, it perceives a distorted image. Look at the ego of lust. The interior aspects of lust. Lust is very obsessive. Lust is entirely sensual. And lust is violent. But particularly, lust has no capability to manifest any type of self-respect. So what does it see on the outside when it sees itself reflected in others? Well, it sees dramas where people are being objectified. It sees manipulation. It sees circumstances where there is no sense of responsibility. It sees very aggressive exchanges of energy. The ego of lust, sometimes it wants to give it all. Sometimes it wants to take energy. And sometimes it is both. This is what it sees. And if lust is that type of aggressive, let's take a quick look at this thing called laziness. Because laziness can also be very deceiving. Internally, that ego of laziness can be like numb, like lacking the ability of feeling, but it can also be frustrated. It can also show regretfulness. And on the outside, that internal condition is a distorted image that comes across as procrastination, as seeing someone who is unable to concentrate, someone who is perhaps considered dismissive. And even though laziness, we can always associate it with somebody who is sedentary, somebody who's thrown in the couch and they're not doing the things, they don't pick in their clothes, etc. Well, in some cases, there are aspects of laziness that can be exceedingly active. And that may even sound counterproductive. But all those of us that we spend so many hours working and we're always connected to work and the phone and the email and commitments and carrying people here and there, it's like doing all kinds of things except the things that are truly important. So it's avoiding its own responsibilities. This is what happens with this ego. So I'm just going to share with you these three. I'm sure that you can start seeing these characteristics and making all these connections yourself. But look, in terms of that thing that is truly divine within us, that consciousness that you and I have, this consciousness has been fragmented. And there is a little bit of consciousness in each and every one of these defects that we have within. As we observe the way that these defects behave, we start finding a lot of commonalities in these defects. And one thing that is common in every single defect is that whether it's laziness or lust, or whether it is pride or envy, or jealousy or resentment, or whatever, these defects are always projecting their thoughts. And they do this because in the ego, the mind itself is split. If we were in our pure state, in the pristine innocence and purity, as if we were in the Garden of Eden, we would have an incarnated consciousness in a physical human form, and in that condition, the mind would be entirely receptive. We would be able to perceive the cosmic truths without relying on reason. The consciousness itself would be able to use the mind to gather that information because it would be the interaction of the interior mind, that mind that connects the consciousness to our being, to our divine being, our spirit, our innermost. But in the ego, the mind is split, and there's a part that tries to receive, but there's another part that is constantly projecting. So it's always projecting its thoughts, and it uses the intellectual brain for that. This is why you will see that every time you see a psychological aggregate, it is always comparing. And comparing is the worst thing that we could do, because we harm ourselves and we harm others with a comparison. But that is what the ego does. In terms of emotions, the ego will make use of the emotional brain that we have in our human form just to express all of its emotions. And lamentably, all those emotions are inferior in nature. I mean, we can argue, we can say, oh, but we have some positive values. I mean, I feel affection for this person, and I feel love for that, and I love my cat, and my dog is wonderful. And we're not going to argue that. But what we will tell you is that even within our own positive values, we make mistakes. The positive values are nothing more than defects that have not degenerated any further. These positive values that we have, they try to do good, but they don't even know when is the time to do good, and then they make things worse. I mean, how many times, perhaps it has happened to you, how many times have you not seen yourself saying something and then realizing, that is not what I meant? Or doing something and saying, that is not what I wanted to see happen. You see? Ideally, we would not have any of this, and through us, we would be a fine and delicate instrument of our innermost, and the innermost would be able to operate directly through us in our purest form, and we would be able to touch every heart, lift those people who are suffering. I mean, that would be the case. But the ego just uses the emotional brain. That emotional brain is right there, 3 fingers above your navel, in that solar plexus. And what about the habits? The ego will use the motor, sexual, and instinctive centers, which is the third brain that we have in our human machine, to express all of its things. So bottom line, every time that a defect is stimulated, it will react. And so when our ego perceives a reflection of itself in someone else, boom, there is the reaction. So the people around us, our neighbors, they are just a mirror where we are seeing ourselves reflected. But we just do not understand that thing that we are seeing, that reflection, that is our own. It is something that exists so deep within our psychological moon that we just don't perceive it anymore. We are not even aware that we are seeing ourselves reflected in others. And rather, we get so identified with the event, we get so identified with the circumstances, that we don't reflect on these things. We just say, the problem is you. You are the problem. The problem is outside. And that is a lie. I mean, wasn't it Michael Jackson who said, want to change things? Change the man in the mirror. It's a beautiful thing. We must learn to reflect on all of these things. We live in a state of fascination, of unconsciousness, and psychological sleep. We must break away from that. And the thing is that not only we judge others, we even judge the adepts and their actions. You see this example here. Most people know who this is. This is Jesus as he walks into the temple and he notices that in the temple, instead of being people offering reverence and veneration to what is divine, the temple is just full of merchants. They're selling things, they're trading coin. And what does he do? In this image, we see Jesus, he retrieves a whip and he whips the merchants out of the temple. Most people see this image, and because we just projecting our stuff, they say, Jesus was angry. That is impossible. There cannot be a great master of such caliber that has any trace of something as inferior as anger. I mean, we know how people behave when they're angry. But what we're seeing here is a reflection of our own anger. When we understand that the lives of the great masters are lived in symbols, so that when we see them, we can extract wisdom from that, we can see here that the temple itself is a reflection of our own human body. The temple of the Holy Spirit, based on the teachings of Paul of Tarsus, the Apostle Paul, is indeed the cerebrospinal system in each and every one of us. That is where the fire of Kundalini can ignite and rise, awaken the chakras, return to us faculties, virtues, powers, abilities that don't belong to the ego, but to our own innermost. And so that is the temple. That image of Jesus, what we see there is the action of our internal Savior, the action of the consciousness that is awakened. Because the whip is always a symbol of willpower. If you happen to find yourself in a dream and you see yourself holding a whip, that is an indication that either you're using your willpower in ways that are edifying and dignifying, or that you must use your willpower to overcome some circumstance. And of course, all of those merchants that inner being with that willpower is expelling from the temple are these inferior psychological aggregates that we carry within. So when we see this image, now you can see this is no longer Jesus angry. This is a profound teaching, all in symbols to the consciousness. Now let me show you this one. This is the kiss of Judas. Everybody thinks that Judas was a traitor. Bad Judas. This is what they say. No. These men surrounding the great master of masters, these were all adepts as well. And in this case, of all of the apostles, it was Judas, the most exalted one. In the esoteric tradition, it is always taught that Jesus had to convince Judas to exercise this role. And Judas suffered tremendously. He did not want to do it. But because their lives are lived in symbols, Judas teaches us the doctrine of the elimination of the ego. And what do we see here? We see here Judas as a representation of our inner demon of desire. That aspect of us that is willing to give away the greatest of gifts, the greatest of blessings, just to satisfy his desires. And Judas reflects that by kissing the great master, giving him away, and in exchange receiving 30 coins of silver. You see? So when we see this here, now we see this is no longer a betrayal. This is a teaching veiled in symbols. And just like this, there are so many other teachings that we would love to have the time to explain and share, but let's just continue. Because if we're going to make this practical, then maybe the question is, what can we do about this? If we have these insights, how can we make this practical and make this useful so that we can transform? Well, for starters, let's make the most of our adversity. Here are some actions that you can use to build a rich internal life. So the first thing is, remember, embrace the relative perspective of reality. Invoke the help of powers who are superior to the mind to help you comprehend these defects and eliminate them. We know that the universe is an illusion. We know that it is Maya. Maya means not that. We know that. We know that everything will pass. But still knowing that, let's treat the universe as real. Let's take advantage of this moment, of this now. And let's see others as a mirror. I mean, if you see someone else and you say that person is toxic, or oh, that person looks chopped, that person, look, it's drunk. We must say, that is me. There is an aspect of me that is that. And let's observe the way that we think, how we feel, how we behave, and we will find some of those events. Give ourselves the opportunity to observe, to comprehend, to eliminate these aspects, and let's give an opportunity to the virtues of the being to flourish. Let's go ahead and embrace that defect that we see in others. Let's see how is it that exists in our mind, how it manifests in our emotion. How is it that we have done something similar? And let's listen when others come to criticize. Refrain from reacting. Put a stop to the reaction of the mind and put a stop to the reaction of the heart. Assume that that defect exists in you, because when you refrain those reactions, you slowly start developing a very powerful individuality, and you start integrating the being. Soon enough, the 5 centers in the human machine, they start harmonizing. So refrain from your reactions. And while you're doing that, build a rich inner life. Live in gratitude. Make your words seeds of harmony. All of this work, it slowly crystallizes in the substance of self-sacrifice. Suddenly, the substance of sacrifice starts crystallizing in your immediate environment, and it is in that canvas where you can crystallize your own internal transformation. So let's recap this. We do not know ourselves. Okay, by now, that is not a surprise. But because we do not know ourselves, we fail to see ourselves reflected in others. So we must break a deeply ingrained lie. The problem is not outside. The problem is within. And if we fail to see ourselves reflected in others, as a consequence, we misjudge them. We create an unfair condition for them. There is always a mismatch between what we're witnessing and the judgment itself. And that judgment that we are issuing, that we are offering, is exposing the defect that we have projected. Observe your defect, comprehend it, and eliminate it. In the words of the great master, we are invited to reflect. Never let yourself be carried away by appearances, because appearances are deceiving. Not to blame our defects on anyone else. That is what we must do. So, dear friends, this is what we wanted to share with you tonight. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. May all beings be happy.